Next, extreme sex. Stories about people going to extreme measures in the name of sex. Teddy Roosevelt takes on New York's working girl. Aleister Crowley helps ignite a sexual revolution. And Emperor Nero throws an orgy for the ages. We're zigzagging through history, skipping the boring parts, and cutting straight to the good stuff. Ready for a new chapter in history? These are the shocking stories behind how sex changed the world.
That's exciting!
Historians,
Vagina,
sexperts, and regular folks
Sex alive!
reveal unbelievable true stories guaranteed to blow your mind.
Whoa!
Discover facts you won't find in textbooks.
Yep.
As we uncover how sex changed the world. History is filled with people taking life to the extreme. 2,000 years ago, the ancient Romans forged an over-the-top empire. Huge public works, enormous arenas for gladiator fights, and conquests that covered a continent. In terms of sexual extremes, it's tough to top the ancient Roman emperors. Generations of inbreeding mixed with unbridled power led them to commit some pretty crazy acts. And nobody did it like Nero.
The more powerful somebody is, the more they seem to give free rein to their sex lives.
Well, who will fill the cup of the king?
I will.
They control people under them. You get back to the Roman emperors, they had such control.
There were good emperors and there were bad emperors, and the flaws and pitfalls of the imperial system were becoming kind of obvious. Because Augustus was a great emperor. You know, Tiberius managed things very well. Caligula was crazy.
They started out kind of restrained, but it didn't take more than one generation before you started getting this really wild behavior that is still almost a benchmark for us today. I mean, why do we have toga parties, right?
And then there's Nero, quite possibly the most outrageous ruler in the history of the empire. He learns Badass Emperor 101 from his dear old mom, Agrippina.
He's brought up in this extremely close, claustrophobic, sort of venomous court environment. People are extremely ruthless, bumping each other off left, right, and center. And his mother is wonderful at that. Agrippina was an extraordinary figure. She was an expert at politics and setting things so that her son Nero could become emperor.
She had married the Emperor Claudius and succeeded in getting Nero adopted formally by Claudius, so he became his heir. And then she dispatched him with a poison mushroom.
Thanks to Agrippina's power play, in the year 54 AD, Nero becomes emperor at the age of 17. It's not a small job. At the time, the empire covers all lands throughout the Mediterranean region and reaches as far north as Britain. Now in control, Nero no longer needs his mom, so he does what most emperors would do in the situation.
He decides to kill his mother, so he just has her executed.
He had no scruples about killing people.
Very early in his rule, there are signs that he's a bit of a monster.
And as time went on, like all the emperors, he seemed to get more and more far out.
And there's nothing more far out than Nero's sex life.
He really was in love with this woman, Poppaea. And then Poppaea died, and he went into this terrible depression and grief.
He meets a young Greek boy, Sporus, who resembles her. Nero becomes obsessed with Sporus.
So he had him castrated.
Cut his balls off, cut his balls off.
And sort of made him into another Poppaea.
The story goes that he would actually travel around Rome, parading Sporus off as his wife, even indulging in sex acts in taverns.
It was this kind of weird necrophilia, really.
It's all a bit much. That's when a lot of people are starting to think, okay, he's getting a little out of control here. A lot of the Roman emperors would get sidetracked from what they should be doing, which is being efficient managers, running the economy. For one person, it's quite difficult. You have to be an extraordinary manager. If you're running off dealing with castrated boyfriends and the whole bit, you become sidetracked entirely from this, and then things start to fall apart. So it's one of the great pitfalls, I guess, of having this totally unchecked power.
Nero's unchecked power and ability to govern is soon put to the test.
So this huge fire starts in Rome in 64 AD. 2/3 of the city is wiped out. Later generations have this myth that Nero was there fiddling while Rome burns. He wasn't actually there. He was 40 miles away in a villa on the coast.
While Nero didn't watch Rome burn, he was there to reconstruct it in extreme ways only he could imagine.
He takes advantage of the destruction of Rome to start this huge rebuilding program. Some of it is incredibly self-indulgent, unfortunately.
Nero rebuilds Rome as his personal pleasure land on the taxpayers' dime.
So he decides to build this enormous palace, the Golden House, the Domus Aurea, and it takes up this vast area, about 1/3 of the city. There's a zoo, there's swimming pools, there's courtyard.
He had a famous dining room built that was a rotating one.
And it slowly moves around using 4 giant balls and hydraulics, reflecting the motion of the stars.
And the ceiling would open and perfume and flowers would fall down on people.
Which just fits into this sort of fantasy world that he's increasingly entering.
This would probably be the room where he staged his proudest orgies. The Roman emperors seemed to have unbridled appetites. Nero, of course, was not a man who did things by halves. And so when he had a party, he had a real party. He had these week-long, who knows, parties, and the guests couldn't leave because the doors would be locked.
Getting an invitation to the emperor's table was, a mixed pleasure. Because the first time you go, it's incredibly spectacular, but it's incredibly stressful because you never knew what was going to happen. Anything can happen. He could do whatever he wants. If he decides that he wants to have sex with your wife in the back room, you've got to go along with it.
One of the things that has come down to us is the business about his putting on animal skins and having people tied up to stakes, and then he would attack their private parts. And people now think this was bondage, It's like a bondage game. He wasn't really going to kill them, but isn't there this group of people called the furries that put on these costumes and they do all these animal things with each other? That's really what he was doing.
That's the evening's entertainment. After the first 4 or 5 times, it might wear thin, I don't know.
But Nero's salad days would soon come to an end.
As time goes on, the economy starts to flounder, and with the fire and these extraordinary sort of bizarre, self-indulgent public works, the Golden House, he starts to lose popularity very rapidly. The Senate starts to turn against him. Before long, he becomes a hunted man.
So the Senate actually voted him enemy of the Roman state. That was an automatic death penalty, and it was the death penalty in the old Roman way. And when Nero asked what that was, they said, well, they strip you naked and they put your head in a stock and then they beat you to death. And he thought, oh dear.
He flees, runs off with his right-hand man.
They'd really tracked him down. He heard the sound of the approaching horses.
He tries to commit suicide. He can't do it himself, so he gives the knife to his right-hand man and begs him to dispatch him, which apparently the right-hand man doesn't mind too much, having put up with Nero for many years.
His end was not as glorious and theatrical as he would have wished, probably. Nero was probably the consummate wedding between desire and power.
In history, if you've got someone like the Roman emperors who have absolutely no restriction on their sexual impulses, then the sky's the limit. It just keeps becoming more and more extreme. It's incredible what they would get up to. If
they hadn't have existed, it would be almost impossible to believe some of these things.
Water cooler lowdown. Nero blamed the Christians for the burning of Rome. To punish them, he burnt them at the stake in his garden, referring to them as human torches. In addition to his mother, he murdered 2 of his wives. He threw orgies that lasted for days, with the doors chained shut so guests couldn't leave. As Nero learned the hard way, even a Roman emperor has his limits. Coming up.
In New York City, there were literally tens of thousands of prostitutes.
And this all occurred under the watchful eye of the New York City Police Department. Theodore Roosevelt would literally beat them up himself.
Throughout millennia, history has been graced with men and women who've taken their sex lives to the extreme. Wherever sex has gone wild, there have been people interested in creating laws to control it. If you could make a law about sex, what would it be?
If I could make a law about sex, there would be no laws about sex.
The law would be to untame your sexual beast.
This 10-3-date rule that women have, what the heck is that? That would be a law. There should be none of that.
If you're going to have sex with a woman, please pay for their meal.
I would make all good-looking men go through psychological testing.
If I could make a law about sex, it would definitely be to enjoy it.
When it comes to passing sex laws, no place surpasses New York City. Since the days it was known as New Amsterdam, two extreme forces have battled for domination of New York: vice and reform. At the turn of the 20th century, vice was in control. Prostitution was rampant. But Gotham's sex business soon found itself in the grip of the ultimate crime fighter, a man who would go to the greatest of lengths to clean up the Big Apple, Theodore Roosevelt.
New York City at the turn of the century was basically like a Wild West frontier town, only with millions of people.
There were hundreds of languages spoken. Most of the people who lived in New York City were not born there or even born in the United States. And what happens? Vice. There were literally hundreds of beer joints, tens of thousands of prostitutes, full-time and part-time.
It was a no-holds-barred kind of sex den. It was a bit of a cesspool that would make, Amsterdam look like Branson, Missouri. This all occurred under the watchful eye of the New York City Police Department, which did nothing to stop it, in large part because they were either taking a bribe or participating in the activities themselves. This was also the era of corrupt government in New York City, the famous Tammany Hall,
which was a democratic machine that controlled both the police, politics, tax collecting, building permits, every aspect of political life in New York City.
So the whole system was in need of a shakeup, and it's within this context that Teddy Roosevelt steps in. Theodore Roosevelt comes from one of the wealthiest and oldest families in New York. They date back to the Dutch settlements of New Amsterdam. He enters politics with a commitment to clean up what he thought was an unjust political system. He's also very influenced by the progressive movement. Now, the progressives wanted to counteract that notion of the laissez-faire economy, that if you could buy it, you should get it. So as a progressive, he comes in and says, no, the law has a responsibility to protect people from themselves. And they're going to step in so that you can't necessarily engage in prostitution. So he's waging this major crusade on his own as police commissioner against the New York City Police Department.
Roosevelt's crusade against the rank and file would not be easy, especially with corruption coming from the top.
One of whom is a captain of the New York City Police Force known as Big Bill Devery, who is a deeply corrupt policeman who was in the rackets at all possible levels.
Now, his attitude, and what he often say to his cops, see, hear, say nothing, eat, drink, pay nothing. In other words, pretend like you're trying to police them and then take a payoff and have a little fun for free. Roosevelt comes in, and he immediately actually starts going out on the beat. You know, if he would see a cop, sleeping on the job or not enforcing the laws, he would literally kind of beat them up himself. So there were forces within the police department that absolutely hated Roosevelt, but that did not deter him. At one point, he decides that the way to actually get to the vice is not by just going after the prostitutes, but by going after the Johns, which meant that he was prosecuting not just the women, but the men.
But even that didn't clean up all the prostitution in the Big Apple. So Roosevelt went after another vice he thought fueled the trade.
One of the ways they do that is enforcing a law that prohibited the sale of alcohol on